And to Gaza now, hundreds of thousands of evacuees have fled Rafah as repeated international calls urge Israel to exercise caution before launching a ground offensive on the city. Israel has been fighting Hamas across Gaza since the militant group carried out the October 7th terror attacks on Israel. But now Israeli soldiers are returning to the north of the Strip, where Hamas forces have regrouped in areas Israel said it had cleared.
The rush to get water in central Gaza's Deir el-Balah is desperate. Supplies here were already low, but the arrival of thousands of evacuees from Rafah means there is even less to go around.
In Deir el-Balah, people are now on top of each other. People are walking on each other. It's very crowded. There's no empty space. Those who are staying in houses have some 10 displaced families staying with them. For myself, I was staying with my children and my wife in a tent. I now have 5 or 6 families staying in the tent with me. It's very crowded.
Once deemed a safe zone, around 1.4 million people sought shelter in Rafah in recent months. Now they're leaving as Israel ramps up its attacks. Fleeing families have been forced to uproot their lives again and again.
Our suffering is continuous. We're tired of moving from a place to another, and those places are not near each other, from a city to another, so we need transportation. We're tired. How long will we have to stay in this situation?
The United States has repeatedly cautioned Israel against expanding its offensive into Rafah, but Israel insists the city is a Hamas stronghold and that it has to drive out militants hiding there. Despite more than 7 months of war, Hamas remains active across the territory. This week, Israeli soldiers returned to the north of Gaza, an area it claimed to have captured months ago.
Well, for more on this, let's cross over to DW's Tania Krämer in Jerusalem. Tania, if the Israeli army is targeting northern Gaza again, what does this mean for the operation in the south around Rafah?
Well, all we can say at this point is what it means is that Israel is fighting again with its ground forces on all fronts in the Gaza Strip. And we have seen also heavy air bombardment across the Gaza Strip now. In the north, Israeli troops were sent in again to places like Jabalia refugee camp, Zaytun, which is in the western part, in the eastern part of Gaza, and also other parts in the northern Gaza Strip. Now, Israel withdrew from that area a month ago, but intense fighting has now been reported there. Also reports from ambulances not being able to go into certain areas. Now, the internal messaging here is that this was part of the plan all along, that the army withdrew, but then also is able to go in whenever they need to go in. But there's also a discussion and criticism here saying that this is also a problem because there is no plan for the day after, and that Hamas is able, as the Israeli army said, to regroup in such areas. But we've just seen the dramatic scenes in the report, what's happening in the south of Gaza, but also, of course, there have been people, they remained in the northern part of Gaza, and those people as well, they have been told to relocate, to evacuate. They're forced to go to some other places, to western parts of the northern Gaza Strip. And of course, this is northern Gaza, where in the past month we've been talking about not enough aid and goods have been coming in. So the situation is, of course, also extremely difficult for people there.
Now, Gaza has been left without functioning government. Does Israel have any clear plan for the territory when the war is over?
There has been no real official plan that has been publicly at least shared. There have been some strategy papers, some announcement made by politicians. We know more about what the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want to see in Gaza. He said that the Palestinian Authority, that's the entity that is governing parts of the occupied West Bank in a very limited rule there. He doesn't want to see them back in Gaza, and he's backed up by his far-right cabinet members. So all of this also is, of course, now another question looking at the Rafah offensive there. And we've heard it from the United States as well. They have said there needs to be a discussion. What will the day after look like? Because, it's not just about, all the civilians, that there is no credible plan to evacuate the civilians, but what will happen afterwards, because Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said time and time again that he needs to go, or the military rather needs to go into Rafah to eliminate those 4 battalions of Hamas, and then that would enable Israel to achieve a total victory. But apart from that, of course, there's also a question, will the Palestinians be asked what they will want to see, who is governing Gaza at the end of the war?
DW's Tania Krämer there reporting from Jerusalem. Thank you very much, Tania.
Meanwhile, sirens have sounded across Israel in somber ceremonies to mark Memorial Day. This year's commemoration was dedicated to the more than 1,200 people killed by Hamas last year, as well as the soldiers who've died during the war in Gaza. Now, over 7 months on, Israeli citizens are still struggling to deal with the fallout of last October's attacks. DW's Israel correspondent Tania Krämer met with 2 of them for this next report.
Israeli photographer Erez Kaganovich shows the faces of those who survived the Hamas terror attack and those who helped others on the day that changed the country.
I want to commemorate the bravery and optimism and sense of resilience that I saw from the Israeli citizen. It was amazing to see how they actually respond to the horrendous terrorist attack on October 7th. There were so many amazing stories of people who, woke up in the morning and they decided to rose up to that moment and to save so many lives.
One of them is Rami Davidian, a farmer from a village in southern Israel. He and a group of friends rescued hundreds of mainly young partygoers at the Nova Music Festival. Rami and Erez returned to the site of the rave. Today, other portraits stand here in memorial to those killed and those abducted to Gaza by Hamas militants. Rami answered a call from a friend and raced here to help, despite the risk of rocket attacks and running into militants. Word spread quickly as worried parents sent him locations on WhatsApp to get their children to safety.
After
I rescued the first group, they circulated my phone number to other groups. And this is how the name Rami and my number spread like a bushfire. Because they had no one else to turn to.
He became a hero to many Israelis and is often recognized. But he says coming back here is not easy.
Nothing will ever be like it was before that day. For me, everything has changed. I have nightmares and flashbacks of the horrors I have seen, and my body is failing on me. I'm not the same Rami. I'm no longer a happy person.
Personal stories like Rami's are at the heart of the exhibition, but they also highlight a deeper change that took place on October 7th, one that many Israelis are still struggling with.
Actually, what happened on October 7 is that something very essential broke on that morning. And when you grew up in Israel, you grew up with a sense that no matter what is going to happen, the IDF and the Israeli government will do everything in their own power to actually to safeguard the Israeli citizens. But on October 7, we realized that the army wasn't there and the government wasn't there, and people were left to their own destiny.
Despite the suffering that people experienced that day, Erez Kaganovich wants the stories behind these photos to convey resilience and optimism, for people to look forward.
I'm joined in the studio now by our Middle East analyst, Shani Rozanes. Shani, good to have you here again. Now, Memorial Day is always a very emotional affair in Israel. This was the first time it was being marked since October 7th. How was this year different?
Well, it's probably the most dire that Israel has seen in the last 50 years. You could feel the atmosphere was heavy. The ceremonies were, everything is clouded by the trauma of October 7th, which is still very much alive in Israel's national psyche, in people's memories. Many Israelis are still on October 7th, those who have lost their loved ones, those who still have hostages kept in Gaza. October 7th is still very much alive for Israelis. And today, of all days, trying to, Memorial Day tries to maybe close the circle, try to move on, commemorate and maybe talk about the resilience, about, coming from the ashes. It's still very hard for most Israelis who still are very much feeling those wounds very deep.
Yeah. Something we've heard time and time again since October 7th, and in this report again, is that it was an event that kind of shattered people's trust, not only in the security that Israel, as as a safe haven for Jews from around the world, promised, but also in the IDF and in the government. How has that changed?
Well, there's no doubt Israel is a different country after October 7th. And to the very most fundamental elements of the trust in government and people's, connection with the government, with the entity that is called the State of Israel. Some has grew stronger in their connection to that and to the ideas leading it. Some have been pulled apart. We need to remember this is still happening. For Israelis, this war is still ongoing. The world rightfully so focuses on Gaza, but there's still a very active war going also in the north of Israel, where there's been shelling on and on, no end. Today we've also seen, Israelis have counted more people wounded there. Israelis still feel under attack, and this ongoing challenges that the Israel and the Israeli government and the Israeli IDF are experiencing in protecting Israelis and bringing this war to an end. It's becoming very, grinding for Israelis. They're starting to slowly realize that this cycle, that they thought would be quick and done, is far from being over. And there's more and more despair and fear for what may come that is slowly creeping in.
Let's look at Prime Minister Netanyahu's role in all of this, because he was already under intense pressure before October 7th. How do Israelis feel about him today?
It's a mixed bag. Many times in a war, you see a lot of people, come around their leader, come together, trying to sort of overcome the hardship. Netanyahu has always been a very divisive figure, and especially after, the backdrop for the attack was, the attempt for a reform in the judicial system who basically tore Israel apart. These tears are still there, even though, October 7th kind of brought everybody together for a short while. The issue of Netanyahu himself is still very much on the table. And we see Netanyahu himself this Memorial Day and also and tomorrow will be Independence Day in Israel. He's going to be very much reserved. He already announced cancelling his participation in some of the lead events of the day that were usually the prime day for the Prime Minister to be to take part in. And there's this fear now, or there's these rumors that he's basically hiding from the future. He's afraid of the scrutiny, he's afraid of the criticism, and we're seeing a very unusual behavior when it comes to Netanyahu. It's still too soon to say if that will lead to any political circumstances, because we have not seen him take full responsibility for his role and the government's role. He's still talking about the need for everybody to be examined and not only him and his role in it. So that anger, that criticism, they're still not being seen as leading to any changes on the ground in Israel yet.
October 7th led then to the incursion into Gaza, and that campaign has drawn increasing international criticism. Are Israelis as divided about what's happening in Gaza as the rest of the world?
Well, unfortunately, Israelis are not very much aware of what happens in Gaza. The Israeli media shelters Israelis from seeing the hard, unbearable photos that are coming from Gaza, from realizing the magnitude of the tragedy and the killing in Gaza. And Israelis are also not feel like the national mood is such they cannot contain that anymore. There is a big debate on whether fighting until the erosion of Hamas is achieved, which is the goal that the government has set himself, is still an achievable goal, and is it still worth fighting, even in the price of losing the lives of the hostages kept in Gaza? This is a very big issue, still tearing Israel apart. But the faith of the Palestinians in Gaza is not on the agenda for Israelis.
As DW's Shani, Rozanes, always great to get your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole.